helping Jews with SARS is it's a big mitzvah.
It's a good thing. I wish there were less Jews with Soros. That would be even better.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for being here. We have Rabbi Yaffe and our attendees are starting to pile in. We're going to, what we'll do is we have our outline, and then I'll also from time to time, I'll read some of the questions that will come through in the chat.
Sure. Okay. Sure. Can you send me the Zoom one more time? Because I'm trying to get it on my larger iPad, but I don't have it on my iPad for some reason.
All right, now you should have it. Now it should work.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
All right, welcome to some of our friends. Some of you posted your names, some didn't, but I see our lead and Arnie, welcome, and Arthur Miller, welcome. Ezra, welcome. Ace Stumbo, I'm not sure who you are. Ivan Gold, welcome. Jade, Priest Mose, welcome. Larry Rosen, welcome. Malko, welcome. Marilyn Fiddling, welcome. Rabbi Michael Broyd, welcome. I will want to mention you in the beginning of my remarks, so I'll sing you out again, but welcome. Rabbi Kafka, welcome. Scott Snyder, good to see you, welcome. Who else do we have here? Scroll down. Sona Joyner, welcome. Tony, good to see you. Tony McCaw, I'm glad you made it on. Joseph Hines, welcome.
So I got an email saying you had sent it, but I didn't get it. Please resend. I resent it. You got it.
I'll send it right. Oh, okay. You know what? I will copy the information and paste it into that email so you have it here.
Okay, great.
Okay, I just sent it. You should have it right
Thank
there. I have Ezra. Thank you for your message. I'm getting messages from some number of people that they got a message when trying to log in, error message. I'm going to tell, but if anybody else got that, and let me know. What I'll do is I'll just give it a couple of minutes here as a couple more people, as people come in. And also I'm getting some people are having some tech messages, some tech errors.
Professor Dershowitz.
Yes.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay.
I'm going to come on in 1 second in quasi-person, but it's so great to see you again.
It's nice to see you again. Good. It's been a while.
Yes, it has. There's been some minor things going on, huh?
A few things, a couple
That
of
we're here
things.
to talk
Yeah.
about.
How long have you been in Portland?
Well, I'm not in Portland at all. I'm just visiting the same way you are. I'm still in Massachusetts, but I've moved west. I'm now in Springfield.
Oh, wonderful. It's a great city.
It is a very nice city, yeah. So I'm back on the Connecticut River. I spent most of my adult life after I got married in Hartford, and now I'm back.
Great.
Yeah. I pass through the Boston area pretty often for kosher work. I do some kosher.
Well, I'm not there. I'm not there anymore. I'm in various places: New York, Miami Beach, and Martha's Vineyard. Right now, Martha's Vineyard.
Well, when you are once again after the vaccine, hopefully in New York, I would
Mhm.
love to see you again sometime. It's
That would be wonderful.
I
That would be
treasure
wonderful.
all those very interesting conversations we had.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I remember.
I'm still working on some of your pet peeves.
Mhm. Got a lot of those. They keep increasing.
It's good. Okay, I'm going to come on in 1 second.
I'm just getting some messages from people that are having trouble getting in. So I'm going to ask our tech support here. Are we having any issues with others? Ivan said, thank you, Ivan, for your message. And thank you. I see I have 2 anonymous questions, which we will we'll bring up. I'll look at those as we get there. I don't know why some people are having. It says too many requests. Some people are getting a message. Okay, I thank you all for your time. We will start at 12:05, whether or not everybody gets in. Craig Byrne, welcome. Elliot, welcome. My mom is here. Welcome.
Okay.
Jacob, welcome. Jemmy, welcome. And if I don't catch everybody,
And you see and hear me now clearly?
Yeah, you're great. You're
Okay.
terrific.
I have a little bit of a hoarse throat, but I'll try my best with cough drops.
Terrific. Oh no. I think what's happening is too many people are clicking the link at the same time. Okay, Elliot, thank you for your message. I'm going to welcome everybody, and we'll get started. We'll message those. Unfortunately, some people are having tech support issues, but we'll as throughout the program, we'll try to make sure that everybody can get on. Great. So okay, good afternoon and welcome to the 3rd annual American Judaic Legal Symposium hosted by the Ben Arroyo Jewish Learning Academy here in Portland, Oregon. First of all, I want to thank our panelists, Professor Dershowitz and Rabbi Yaffe. Thank you very much for being here and for making this possible. Zoom has created a smaller world that has brought us together in ways that were so much more distant prior to that. Thank you to our participants, to everybody who is here, both those who are here in the Zoom room, and also this is being live streamed onto YouTube. So thank you to those who are with us in both of those. I want to take a moment and thank our advisory, and Arnie Polk serves on the advisory. Ivan Gold serves on the advisory of the American Judaic Legal Symposium here in Portland. This year, sadly, our advisory team lost 2 of its greatest and participants, and we mourn the passing of Gershom Goldstein, one of the recognized attorneys here in Portland, whose name carried a lot of weight both in the legal world, also in the Jewish world, and throughout the community. Gershom is dearly missed. He really helped form the American Judaic Legal Symposium here. And we have the honor of having his wife Pauline with us today. And Pauline, we mourn Gersham's passing, and we remember his presence. Another member of our symposium advisory was Jeff Babner, also one of the champions of this event, really helped bring it together, a dear friend, and Jeff is sorely missed. And also we have my dear friend, his son, Jeremy Babner, with us today. So Jeremy, thank you for being here. Thank you to the sponsors who made this event possible, Greenlight Law Group, Perry Salazar, Arnie Polk. Also, thank you to our tech support, Menachem Mendel Krasinski, who brought this all together. So thank you all. We have a number of us who are here, both in the crowd and listening, who I wanted to recognize. So we have the Honorable Michael Simon, U.S. District Judge, with us today. We have Ryan Bounds, the Assistant U.S. Attorney for the District of Oregon. We have Jade Priest Maoz of the Oregon State Bar. I also want to give a special welcome to Rabbi Michael Broyd, who is a formal, for 2 years, was a panelist here on our American Judaic Legal Society Symposium. And very honored, Rabbi Broyd, that you are with us today. We have an incredible panel. We have Alan Dershowitz, who doesn't need introduction yet. I will read some of his bio here. Professor Alan Dershowitz is a Brooklyn native who has been called the nation's most peripatetic civil liberties lawyer and is one of the most distinguished defenders of individual rights, the best known criminal lawyer in the world, the top lawyer of last resort, America's most public Jewish defender, and Israel's single most visible defender, the Jewish state's lead attorney in the court of public opinion. He's the Felix Frankfurter Professor at Law at Harvard Law School. Dershowitz is a graduate of Brooklyn College and Yale Law School, joined the Harvard Law School faculty at the age of 25 after clerking for Judge David Bazelon and Justice Arthur Goldberg. He has also published more than 1,000 articles in magazines, newspapers, journals, and blogs such as the New York Times Magazine, Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Harvard Law Review, the Yale Law Journal, Huffington Post, Newsmax, Jerusalem Post, and Haaretz. And significantly, in his bio, which is posted on the Harvard Law School's page, it says that his areas of interest are comparative and foreign law and Jewish law. So this is the perfect place and perfect interest for you. Thank you very much, Professor Dershowitz, for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words.
We have also Rabbi Shlomo Yaffe. Rabbi Yaffe is the Dean of the Institute of American and Talmudic Law in New York, New York. He's the director of the Institute for Judaic Knowledge and a member of the editorial staff at Chabad.org. Rabbi Yaffe has lectured, led seminars, and visiting scholar programs throughout North America, as well as Mexico, Europe, and Africa, as well as having written extensively for various forums. He's authored several turnkey educational programs, including serving as lead author for the Rohr Jewish Learning Institute's JLI Living with Integrity course. He recently completed an appointment as scholar in residence at the Chabad House in Harvard, serving the Harvard and MIT communities. In his capacity of Dean of the Institute, he has sat in panels with distinguished members of the bar, including Justice Scalia of the Supreme Court of the United States. Rabbi Yaffe is a pioneer in the American and Judaic comparative law symposiums such as these. And he's also a personal mentor of mine who showed me and trained me and guided me in developing this program and throughout the years many times. So Rabbi Yaffe, thank you for being here. And we're looking very much forward to today's topic and today's symposium. Rabbi Yaffe and Professor Dershowitz, we live in a very, very unique time. There is a pandemic that's raging the world, which is causing people to limit both their civil liberties and their religious liberties. On the religious side, as a rabbi, there's some fascinating and moving changes or effects of this pandemic. One of the rights of importance in Judaism is the way we bury our dead. One of the saddest parts of the pandemic was knowing that some of our greatest Jewish leaders and Jewish teachers didn't even receive a proper Jewish burial. And that's something that was a preemptive measure to stop the spread of pandemic. So I'm going to ask Rabbi Yaffe first, you can talk to us a little bit about, in Judaic law, what are the parameters that constitute a public health need? What allows government or religious institutions to preemptively curb personal rights and freedoms? What historical precedences do we have for such situations? Rabbi Yaffe.
So I'm going to attempt to share the screen. Let's see. Okay. So I should begin with a very quick, we're going to be going, everyone who talks about this for the last, 2,000 years, 1,800 years, is going back to a set of verses, and within the last 800 years, a set of statements, 1,500 years set of statements in the Talmud, statements by Maimonides, which condense what the Talmud says. And there's a lot of tremendously good writing about the halachic details, the details in Jewish law during the recent pandemic, but they're all based on these few texts. So I'm first going to go to the most basic statement, which is with regards to the concept of Judaism and danger to life. So Maimonides here in this slide is talking about, it's the laws of the foundations of the Torah, the very beginning of Maimonides' code, which remains to this day the only code that encompasses basically all of Jewish life and belief. And in this Mishnah Torah, in this code, he talks about where a Jew must give his or her life rather than abandon Judaism. Martyrdom is an obligation, but under very limited circumstances. What does martyrdom have to do with disease? So Maimonides lays this out, and this appears in numerous places in both the Babylonian and Israeli Talmud. It appears, and it's constantly reiterated down to this day. So just as these principles apply regarding being forced to transgress, they also apply regarding sicknesses. What is implied? When a person becomes sick and is in danger of dying, if the physicians say that his cure involves transgressing a given Torah prohibition, the physician's advice should be followed. When there is danger to life, one may use any of the Torah prohibitions as a remedy, with the exception of the worship of false gods, forbidden sexual relations, and murder. Even when there is a danger to life, one may not use them as a remedy. If one transgresses and uses them as a remedy, the court may impose the appropriate punishment upon him. Now, I just want to make the key point that how these three things might factor into medicine is a whole different subject. But basically, we've heard reports from Western China about the harvesting of organs from political prisoners, so their murder is covered. The other stuff we can look at another time. But the key issue over here actually is that all the laws of the Torah, with the exception of these three, which are completely irrelevant in the context of our discussion, may be transgressed and indeed must be transgressed in order to save someone's life. The question is what constitutes danger? So the answer is we can once again look to a key point of the laws of saving someone's life, that if someone is injured, even if we think there's a very small chance that they will survive, we're allowed to break the Shabbat and all other laws of the Torah in order to rescue them even for some temporary life. Now, and this is combined this is combined with texts we'll look at later. I don't want to take more than my time. With twofold. One, that the rabbis have the ability to enforce any principle that they consider a value. So technically, the putting someone else in danger, saving yourself from danger, and so on, are not laws that have penalties and coercion involved. But it's very clear, as we'll see later in a text, that anything that the halachic authorities, the authorities who define Jewish law, which is more fragmented today, but it exists. But basically, whoever your halachic authority is, okay, they have the absolute right to impose any coercive measure, including penalties and punishment, and certainly coercion via financial movement, putting on a mask, etc. Because once there is a value of the Torah at stake, which in this case is saving life, which, as we'll see, we have some texts which demonstrate how important it is. So there exists absolute a blanket fiat for the rabbis to do whatever they see fit. And if you'll notice the words here, they're really important. If the physicians say, what is the definition of danger to life that triggers this whole cascade of legal remedies, whatever the opinion of physicians is, which means to say there are obviously fringes to this, but we can say that the generally accepted medical wisdom that is professed by the majority of people, and indeed there's a commentary on the Code of Jewish Law that says those certified by the authorities of that kingdom. So in other words, the mainstream majority medical profession defines reality in each generation according to Jewish law. Those are the key parameters. Am I missing anything that you wanted to talk about?
So thank you, Rabbi Yafi. And kind of laying out that in Judaism, the value is in the Hebrew term known as pikuach nefesh, which means if there's a danger of life, that basically takes precedence over all other religious rites, with the exception of three, like you said, worshiping false gods, forbidden sexual relations, and murder. And it's under those and that parameter of law that right now we have strictly limited a lot of the religious rites, the religious ways. Jews who didn't miss, the Yom Kippur service, Kol Nidre, even when they were in the Warsaw Ghetto, this year stayed home and said Yom Kippur and said Kol Nidre on their own because of this pikuach nefesh concern. So thank you for that. And if I'm going to ask you to stop the share of your screen, and we'll allow Professor Dershowitz to have kind of the full screen here. And Professor Dershowitz, we're seeing now in America, we're seeing the civil liberties curbed in a way that we've never seen. People are not allowed to go to their own family gatherings, maybe not allowed to get together for Thanksgiving. People are not allowed to operate their businesses in many cases. A real kind of curb on and a halt on many of the liberties that are at the foundation of our country and our constitutional rights. So what is the precedence for this? What is the historical context for this? Is this something that is the first time that this is happening? And from where is the law coming at this point?
Well, as Ecclesiastes said, there's nothing new under the sun. And so there's always a precedent. There's rarely an exact precedent. First, I want to thank you for inviting me to renew my acquaintanceship with Rabbi Yafi, who is fantastic. He was at Harvard for many years, and he used to do a class and give Dvar Torah. And I was honored to be invited a couple of times to dialogue with him over his Talmud and lunch classes. And the only thing wrong with it is he was so much more brilliant than most of the Harvard professors that it became difficult. When the Harvard professors would come and listen to him, they would walk back with their heads in shame. He was so brilliant and so insightful. So it's an honor to be here. I just want to add a few things to the Jewish aspect of it. To ask somebody what Jewish law is like asking somebody what European law is or what American law is. You're going to get differences, particularly among Jews. 2 Jews, 3 opinions. We are the only religion that preserved dissenting opinions throughout history. Remember, other religions burned dissenters and hanged dissenters. We honored them. The Talmud includes dissenting views. Sometimes dissenting views become majority views. Rambam, obviously, is the great codifier, but he has been proved absolutely wrong on his 3 rules. Let me give you an example. One of the 3 rules says forbidden sexual relations. During the Shoah, we know that many people did have forbidden sexual relations in order to save their lives. There's a wonderful Shelat Tshuva by Rabbi Oshry in his book about Shelot Tshuvot from the Shoah, in which a woman had the choice of dying or becoming a prostitute for Nazism. And Rabbi Oshry writes a phenomenal response about how she made the right choice. If Jews have to save their lives by temporarily worshiping a false god and then renouncing that, that's why we say Kol Nidre. That announces in advance that we might have to take some oaths that we will renounce and reject in advance. So, Rambam is not the only source of Jewish law. Today, of course, in the world in which we live, we have so many poskim, and there are so many different interpretations of law. Just go to Borough Park, where I was born, and you will find out how many different interpretations about whether you have to wear a mask, whether you have to have a vaccine, whether you can go to a large Jewish funeral, whether you can, you name it, there are going to be disagreements. There is a kind of Jewish approach, and that approach is a very holy and significant and important approach. And I think we all acknowledge that the approach does focus on pikuach nefesh, the elevation of life. I have placed before you life and death, God says, ubacharto b'chayim, choose life, choose life. And that has been the leading source. And we as a people tragically have been tested too many times. And too many times we have had to choose between life and death. And we chose life, but others chose death for us. You mentioned violating of the rules of Shabbat. The only organization that I'm on the board of directors of is Hatzalah in Israel. And I love Hatzalah because they save lives every day. And it's remarkable to see that the most frum Jew sitting in Yom Kippur services during Ne'ilah, and he's wearing his beeper because all members of Hatzalah must wear them 365, not, Jews say, I'm with you 24/6, not Hatzalah. Hatzalah, I'm with you 24/7. A Jew will get on his motorcycle during Ne'ilah to save a Muslim woman who is having a problem living. And Hatzalah doesn't distinguish between Jewish life and non-Jewish life. So yes, Ubacharta B'chayim is very, very, very important. And there are examples of it. Let me give you an example from my own friendship. I had a friend, a late friend, named Gary Bello, who was a professor at Harvard Law School, very Jewish, and he needed a heart transplant to live. And he was too old and he was not on any lists. And somebody came to him and said, for $25,000, I will get you the heart of a 22-year-old man killed in a motorcycle accident in Brazil. And he came to me for advice. He went to rabbis for advice, and they advised him to choose life, but he chose death. He said, I'm not going to jump ahead of some unknown person in Brazil who might be entitled to that heart before me in order to save my own life. I fundamentally disagreed with him. I argued with him. I yelled at him. And his family did too, but he decided to die with dignity rather than live with the indignity of having taken life from somebody else. So that all is by way of introduction to the incredibly complex Jewish approach to making tragic choices. And that's what these are, tragic choices. Some choices are easy. And here I want to discuss what you said, Rabbi, about the Jewish way of burying, the Jewish way of marrying. Remember, there's a difference between the halakha and the custom. Halakha doesn't require a large wedding. It requires basically 2 people. It doesn't even require a rabbi. You can get married, just the two people. You say the right words, and you're married. The tradition requires the breaking of the cup and the dancing and the chairs. But when you put tradition rather than halacha against the saving of life, it's an easy choice, unfortunately, for many, but it's an easy choice. And we should not elevate tradition and custom over the need to save life. And so I have been critical of what has gone on in my hometown of Borough Park, where there have been large funerals and large weddings and other large gatherings, which are not made necessary by halacha. I have supported the people of Borough Park when they complained that a double standard is being applied to them, that Black Lives Matter can have demonstrations in the street, but you can't have a funeral in the street. That's wrong. You have to have a single objective standard. Malchute dina malchute. The law of our land is our law, but the law has to be fair, and equal protection requires that you can't say that that the gym is more important than a shul, or Walmart is more important than a catering hall for a Jewish wedding. You have to have purely objective standards. How many people, how many feet, all of that. And Jews learn how to adapt very quickly. My shul, Park East, Rabbi Schneier, over the Yomim Noraim did a terrific thing. Instead of having 1 million, they had 4 or 5. They had one at like 6 in the morning to 8. And then they had another one from 9 to 11. Yeah, they davened fast. Yeah, there was no Dvar Torah. Yeah, maybe they skipped a little. But they were able to get everybody who wanted to come and daven to daven standing 6 feet away from each other, wearing masks. So you can adapt, but sometimes you have to obey the law. I know we're going to get to this, but let me just put in my one word, because you asked about precedent. We will be facing the following crisis in the next 6 months. I know it 100% certainty. There will be a vaccine. It will be relatively safe and relatively effective. I say relatively because it's not going to be 100%. We're rushing things. Right now, the vaccine that we're looking at from Pfizer looks like it's 90% effective. Will it operate to help older people like me? I don't know. But there will be a relatively safe and effective vaccine. Most people will jump to take it. There will be some who will say, no, we're not going to take it. There will be some who will falsely cite halacha against taking the vaccines. I think they should be exposed. That's not true. There is nothing in halacha which prevents you from taking a vaccine. After all, remember what the Torah says. If there was going to be a bar mitzvah somewhere, imagine there were bar mitzvahs in the time of the Torah, and somebody, citing Vayikra, were to have scabs and pus on his hand, the Torah says he has to be put outside the city. That means he can't come to the bar mitzvah. So we've already answered those questions. We know that emergencies, medical emergencies, require emergency responses, and that includes tremendous concern for health. I mean, after all, Jews invented the washing of hands. Jews invented so many of the rules of cleanliness that other cultures have adapted over time. So we have precedents, but we also have Supreme Court precedents. The United States Supreme Court in 1905, in a case called Jacobson, ironically, a Jewish man in Massachusetts, refused to allow his child to be vaccinated against smallpox. And the Supreme Court upheld mandatory vaccinations, only with a fine, to be sure. But I predict that the Supreme Court will uphold mandatory vaccinations with real sanctions, imprisonment and compulsion. Now, I want to distinguish two things. A vaccine, let's assume they invent a vaccine that prevents me from having a stroke or heart attack or cancer. I am under no obligation to take that vaccine because I can choose life or not under American secular law. But if it's a vaccine that helps prevent the spread to other innocent people, then that becomes compulsory. I have the right to die, but I don't have the right to become Typhoid Mary. I don't have the right to spread the disease. And so precedent, I think, of the Supreme Court and precedent of Jewish halacha will come together, and coupled with Dina Malchute Dina, I think will lead to the conclusion that Jews, Orthodox Jews, very religious Jews, should accept the rule of law and accept the vaccine if it's safe and effective, and if you don't have a medical condition and other reasons that preclude you from taking it. So that's my initial statement, and I'm looking forward to some back and forth and dialogue with the two great rabbis.
Thank you. But just before we go back, I'm sure Rabbi Yafi has a lot to comment on that. With one of the attendees specifically wanted to know about if there's any constitutional question about a mandate requiring mask wearing, or is that just an obvious, emergency law type of thing?
There's no law on it, but the only issue is who has the authority to do it. For the most part, governors and mayors do not have the authority to make law. They only have the authority to implement law. Only the legislature has the right to make law. But if the legislature mandates that everybody who goes outside must wear a mask, and if you don't, you can go to jail, that would be upheld and constitutional. In Israel, they are fining people very significantly. Nobody's going to jail yet, but they're fining people very significantly for violating masking rules. So masking rules would be constitutional. And in general, religious objections don't apply as long as the rules are neutral and applied across the board and are not intended to discriminate against any religion. For example, it raises some hard questions. Let's assume the medical doctors in Sweden and in Norway and in Denmark, and many have said that we're opposed to circumcision on medical grounds, and therefore Brit Milah is banned. That would pose a very difficult question under American law, and I think we would win that. The Jewish community would win that question because plainly, part of the motivation for that would be anti-religious discrimination, and the medical evidence doesn't support it. But these are hard and complicated questions, and although there's always some precedent, it's almost never exactly on point, and there's room for, therefore, advocacy.
Thank you, Professor Dershowitz. And if anybody has questions they want to put in the chat, I'll try to ask them during our conversation. Rabbi Yafi, we're going to go to your comments. Any comments on what Professor Dershowitz just said?
Well, Professor Dershowitz rightfully limned the complexity of Jewish law and its multiple opinions. That being said, I don't want to go into it simply because it's to take us off our main topic. But for example, Rav Ashi's response about the case of prostitution and so on. So if you look at the Talmud, which Maimonides derives this from, and Maimonides elsewhere makes the point that, for example, for women, there's only two: idol worship and murder, because and so on. So Rav Ashri, in other words, the reason why I am primarily bringing the Talmud and Maimonides here is because the core concepts that we're going to have to be struggling with are articulated most clearly. And though there are sometimes differences, the core concepts about danger to life and the shall we say, the right or the obligation of authorities to coerce in Jewish law and so on are relevant. I mean, it's a fascinating another opportunity for a CLE. What Professor Dershowitz raised about the heart transplants, because there's a lot of discussion in Jewish law about precedents and triage and limited medical resources and so on. But that may be, when the vaccine comes out, that may temporarily be the issue, but it's not germane to our main discussion. What I would say is that the range, I want to, though, just push back a little bit on one point, that the range of opinions in Borough Park are not actually a range of halachic opinions. Just about every highly recognized and competent halachic authority across the Orthodox board, which is very wide, it's a very broad board, has basically said that we need to comply with what, not just because the law of the land is the law, but with the mainstream, the fat part of the bell curve of medical opinion.
I agree.
What you have is, you have a lot of, because as you pointed out, there is no single authority in Jewish law, and it is so fragmented. A lot of people are doing their own thing, and frankly, they're those who slept the most when they were in yeshiva.
Well, slept a lot in yeshiva, but since I left the yeshiva, thanks to you, Rabbi, I've learned a lot. So I'm not counting on my yeshiva learning. I actually once got a Bain Oni minus in Talmud. Bain
Can't
Oni
believe
minus.
it.
It means I didn't even make it to mediocrity. I had something to aspire to. Those who don't understand the word Bain Oni, it means mediocre. So I got a Bain Oni minus and grades like that. It's not so much that I slept, it's that I was a bandit and I would always try to answer back. But I learned a lot since. So thanks to you and others who were great teachers.
Professor Dershowitz, in the American law, you ruled and you said flat out that vaccines can be mandated. You expect them to
only if they're for communicable diseases, not for personal diseases. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. So one of the questions, and this is just a theoretical. I know that it was pointed out that some places want to ban circumcision, but what if in the theory we know the World Health Organization and others have found a lot of health benefits, and particularly in stopping the spread of STDs through circumcision. So would it be possible, would it be legal and constitutional for the U.S. government to say, well, we want to require that all U.S. males are circumcised?
The answer to that is clear. We don't know. Nobody knows. Because think about that. The circumcision is not designed only to help the person, the male circumcised. It's also designed to help his female partner, his wife, theoretically his male partner, if you go there. And so it would come under the potential theory of helping others, but it's not a spreading disease. So I would think that would not be upheld as constitutional if there were mandatory circumcision. It's certainly not something that Jews would ever advocate, because we, unlike many Christians and some Muslims, we're not a proselytizing religion. We do not think that what we do is necessarily right for others. We don't, like, for example, evangelical Protestants and some Catholics say, not only do we not want people of our religion not to have abortions, but we don't want anybody to have abortions. That's not the Jewish way. Obviously, we don't want anybody to do terrible things in the world, but in general, we don't impose our religious teachings and our religious actions on others. We have the Noahide laws, obviously, which do a little of that, but not through compulsion, rather than through really teaching.
And Rabbi Yafi, we're working here off the premise that this is a medical emergency and it's pikuach nefesh. This is a life-saving, life-saving need, which clearly there's over 230,000, probably by now it's close to 240,000 Americans dead from the coronavirus. There's no question about that. However, can you talk to us a little bit about what is the definition? When does something become life-saving, pikuach nefesh? I mean, would Jewish law forbid smoking outside of a school because you can harm the lungs of the young people? Where does, in other words, inherently everything entails a certain amount of risk. Getting into a car contains some risk, as we know. What it constitutes, or what are the parameters that we can start using this kind of medical emergency pikuach nefesh method of law?
Okay, so I am going to share the screen again, because this is all the way here. So, so there is a principle that God guards Shomer P'tayim Hashem. God guards the foolish. Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, that sits Eliezer. Now there are different opinions on this matter. This was written towards the end of his life in 1980. He says, look, that means that if we're ignorant of certain risks, that because we didn't know anything about them, we have to look back at history and say that most of us survived, right? If you remember, there was a time when no one wore helmets when they rode their bicycles, and we all played. I remember this. We played on these when I grew up in Maine on these metal jungle gyms with cracked concrete underneath them. No nice rubber mats like they have today in playgrounds. And Baruch Hashem, the vast majority of us, thank God, survived. You know, as we got smarter about things like wearing helmets and all that, you know, so things changed. But the time comes, we see we're not being protected when we commonly act like fools, in quotation marks. That's a sign the principle no longer applies in this case. Consequently, as evidence mounts that something is not just theoretical danger, but actually killing people, it's also no longer rely on God's protection in this situation. For this reason, now, there are many rabbis disagree with me, but there are, I believe, more, put it this way, those people who are both expert in halacha and truly understand medicine agree with this sentence. For this reason, smoking is prohibited nowadays, not just in a school, even oneself. Now, why do I bring this down? Now, just
to recap, what you're saying is that when the dangers of smoking were not fully accepted or fully known, it was allowed under the Jewish law of God guards the foolish. In other words, we all do things that we don't know about. But now that it's been established, there are those who hold that smoking is an inherent danger. Because smoking is an inherent danger, it's therefore not permissible under Jewish law.
Right. Now, I go said from the Rabbi Herschel Schachter from YU, who's well known. So this is about your own disease. I'll go to a communicable disease in a moment. That when one's risk of developing disease is a small but recognizable one, that you be obliged to undergo the appropriate testing for the disease and to be vaccinated for it, etc. Rav Schachter suggests that a miyad motzi would be in the range of 10%. He has a long discussion, which will take up all our time, as to why this is the case. So we're just going to stay there. Now, what that means is that, so there are two issues here. The first is that even a relatively small risk, even where it's not communicable, we're obliged to deal with it under Jewish law. With regards to communicable diseases, this goes under the premise of, which I'll post in a moment. This goes under the premise of the law of lo tasim damim v'veitecha. You may not put blood in your house. You have to have a parapet around your roof, and you're not allowed to keep a dangerous dog in a place where it could get out and do damage. In other words, any time that you could endanger someone else, we don't allow that degree. We do not allow you to endanger others. Now, what are the statistical parameters? So I should say that this idea we had earlier of Shomer Patayim Hashem, that God preserves the simple, means to say that anything that is considered a normal risk that we do to go out into the fields. I pointed out that no one ever said that Jews shouldn't work in factories in the 1880s, even though factories were much more dangerous back then. That was a risk that people took. And you know what? People drove cars, including highly religious Jews in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, when cars had perimeter frames and no seat belts, which meant that accidents were often fatal. Now cars are much safer. But the point is, there is a norm for getting on with life that the broad parameters of society accept. Farming used to be dangerous and so on, that we accept. But when it comes to a communicable disease, the obligation not to inflict harm on another person is much stricter than the obligation to protect yourself from disease, something that actually Alan alluded to, Professor Dershowitz alluded to. And it seems to me that if you look at all the texts on this, that essentially, to the extent that you can prevent even a small percentage of danger, you're obliged to do so. In other words, the Talmud has a definition, of a pandemic, a certain amount of dead people per population and so on. But that was in those days. Again, the Jewish law firmly holds that Talmudic parameters on medical matters are adjusted by whatever our present medical knowledge is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But all that being said, the fact is quite straightforward, that if you have the ability to not put someone else in danger, if you get in a car, could you, God forbid, go unconscious and kill someone? Yes, that's a risk that's inherently built into the structure of society. That's how we make a living. That's how we go about our life. But if you have a communicable disease, even if it only has a 1% fatality rate, that falls under, if you have a dog, even if it's a wild dog, it's unlikely to kill someone. You still have an absolute obligation that you can't even have that dog, even if it's properly chained, except in certain areas. And I'm going to.
So before
I'm
just
going to put the air.
But and Professor Dishler, I want to go to you, but I just want to bring up one question, just a little pushback, and then we'll switch. Sure. But this is from my friend Jeremy Babner of Lane Powell, and the question is, to what I'm going to kind of rephrase his question a little bit. To what extent do we go to and what the constitution of life saving is? Jeremy asked, and I'm just going to read his question, which was, he says, we know the virus is airborne and that beards prevent a mask's airtight fit. If men are going to leave their house, should they shave their beards enough to ensure their breath won't infect others? So in other words, how far are we going to go to and use this kind of pikuach nefesh ideal?
Look, we always strike a balance. You always do a cost-benefit analysis. I know that many religious people prefer a Kantian view to a Benthamite view. Bentham does a cost-benefit analysis. The Catholic Church rejects the Benthamite view, but in life we all do it. We look at the risks, but we also weigh the benefits. That's why we allow, when my friend Bill Weld ran for governor of Massachusetts, he decided he wanted to raise the speeding limit from 60 to 70. And I wrote an article against that. Balancing convenience, we figured out how many additional deaths would result from raising it 10 miles an hour, how much additional convenience. The way I always put it in terms of health, individual health versus collective health, I think this is just a pithy way of doing it. You have a constitutional right to inhale a cigarette, but you have no constitutional right to exhale a cigarette at me or in a room. So that's the distinction. Now, religious law is always going to be different than secular law. Religious law is largely based on John Stuart Mill, that says we do not tell people to do things for their own benefit. We only tell people to do things that won't harm other people. Religious law is much broader. It can tell you to do things for your own benefit. And if you join the religion, that's an independent act of volition. You agree to comply with its rules, whether or not they hurt other people or help other people. It's very, very important. Look, you talk about working in a factory. I was brought up with a family tradition as follows. My great-grandfather came to America in 1889, and where did he go to work? He went to work at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory.
Wow.
But he was Shomer Shabbat, and he refused to work on Shabbat. And the Great Fire, people don't know this, the Great Fire was on Shabbat, and my grandfather's life was saved. And as the result of it, my great-grandfather always said to people, observing the Shabbat is the way of saving your life. He learned something else from that. He told every member of our family, don't ever work for a large group, always work for yourself. And every Dershowitz pretty much has worked for themselves, mostly not particularly successfully economically, but very independently. And it all grows out of my great-grandfather's life being saved by being in shul on the, one more story about that, only because it's a good story. My father had a little store on the Lower East Side that 5 days a week was wholesale. He was a jobber. And on Sunday, he sold retail. And about every other Sunday, he'd get a ticket for violating the Sunday blue laws. And he would always go in front of the same judge. It was an Orthodox judge named Chaim Barshay. And Barshay would say to everybody who got a ticket on Sunday, why did you get a ticket on Sunday? And most of the Jewish men said, because I'm closed on Shabbat. I'm Shomer Shabbat. And the judge would always say, all right, you're Shomer Shabbat. What was the Parshat HaShavua? And if you got it right, he'd rip up the ticket. And if you got it wrong, he would double the ticket. So fortunately, my father always won the case because he always knew what the Parshat HaShavua was.
That's great.
So thanks for sharing that. And it goes going back on the smoking example. So you said, so can it constitutionally can we ban smoking altogether? In other words, what constitutes a medical need?
I think we could ban it. I think we could ban it altogether because the benefits are so slight. They're really non-existent. There's no, when I was growing up, Joe DiMaggio, the great baseball player, would get on the radio and television and say, before I get up to bat, I always smoke a Lucky Strike cigarette because it gives me strength and energy. And then they had doctors saying smoking cigarettes is good for you. Not only wasn't it bad for you, it was good for you. Now we know that there's no benefit whatsoever because it makes people nervous. I grew up with somebody in Borough Park who was so addicted to cigarettes that Erev Shabbos, he would take a big bottle, big, enormous bottle, like you put apple juice in and stuff, or a large container, and he would blow smoke into the bottle, seal the bottle, and then all during Shabbos, he would open the bottle and sniff in the smoke from the cigarettes. That's how addicted he was to smoking. He was Shomer Shabbos, but he couldn't do without the nicotine. And, if we could abolish smoking in the world, it would be a great mitzvah. But would it be constitutional? Hard question. I'm not sure of the answer. I think the answer is probably it would be constitutional because smoking does have an effect on other people. Would there have to be an exception for smoking in your own home if there were no children? Perhaps. It's a hard question.
So on that line, one of the dangers, the medical dangers right now, is the spread of misinformation. We know that a lot of people are going to be talking about the dangers of the vaccine. A lot of people are going to be talking about the dangers of wearing masks. There's a lot of talk about, groups out there that are saying that the whole coronavirus is a myth, that the government is trying to, get into everybody's life. So, perceivably, can the US government go so far using this kind of medical need, this emergency need, to stop the spread of coronavirus, to stop even our very First Amendment and our freedom of speech and our freedom of sharing what we believe to be the truth? Can it become illegal to say that this vaccine is dangerous?
I don't think so. I think it could become illegal for doctors to say it, and for pharmaceutical companies that have to get FDA approval. But I think the Constitution gives you the right to be wrong and the right to spread misinformation. Let's just remember, it was Learned Hand who once said, the spirit of liberty is the spirit that is not so sure we're right. In 1928 or 1929, every intelligent person believed that mental retardation was hereditary and that it would be good for the race, meaning humankind, to sterilize women who were in any way mentally challenged. That all came out of Harvard. The president of Harvard, Lowell, was a big supporter of eugenics. He was also a big supporter of some of the Germans that were pushing that. But Justice Brandeis and Holmes joined that decision. But there were dissenters. The only dissenter was a religious Catholic on the Supreme Court who said no. And it turned out he was right, and all the great scientists were wrong. And so we have to allow for dissent in science, and it's costly because people will die. Free speech is not free. We learned as kids, sticks and stones will break your bones, but names will never harm you. False. Names will harm you. False information harms you. And but we may have to live with that false information as part of our freedom of speech under the First Amendment.
Rabbi Yaffe, what would Jewish law have to say about the spread of misinformation or the right, the freedom of speech? Can we curb that? Can that?
Okay, so one wouldn't usually conflate the Talmud with John Stuart Mill, but John Stuart Mill, in his very famous book on liberty, makes the point that suppressing ideas that are bad ideas, that he would say are bad ideas, ultimately only gives them more life. That the only way that we ever get to the truth is where all ideas are freely able to be expressed, and we hope that people will have the sense to choose the right ones. Suppressing them only makes the problem worse. And I came to when I started doing, when you were still in school, when I in the Kollel of Manhattan, we started doing these CLEs. I had a little bit of, as we said, Yiddish, a shtickle revelation. So there's a fascinating dichotomy about a certain type of information in Jewish law. That type of information is known as lashon hara, as speaking ill, as slander. In other words, you're not allowed to speak ill of someone, even if the thing you're saying is true. However, there are hundreds and thousands of pages by our great sages throughout all the generations about the evils of lashon hara, of speaking ill of others. And even if it's true, etc., truth is not a defense. But what's fascinating is that with the exception of certain types of very direct insults, because remember, I began earlier by saying that the rabbis have enormous rights to uphold the values of the Torah and create penalties and punishments and coercions and rules that have not previously been there. But what's truly fascinating is that they never did this for lashon hara, except for certain kinds of really nasty attacks, personal attacks on someone that might affect the sense of their genealogical legitimacy to be in the Jewish people and so on. Generally speaking, for all the ink spilled about the evils of lashon hara, the Talmud, certainly the Torah has no penalties for lashon hara other than those given by God. The Talmud has no penalties. And if we look through all the jurisprudence from the 7th century, 8th century Gaonim, all the way up to this day, you'll find very few coercive penalties for lashon hara, even though it genuinely is considered slander, speaking ill of others is considered one of the truly great evils in Judaism. Why this strange dichotomy? Because we have coercive fines and rules about things that are considered much less. And I believe our rabbis and all the generations understood this premise of John Stuart Mill.
Well, I have 3 points about that. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That if you are going to penalize people financially or socially for speaking ill of others, there's one big problem. Because lashon hara is like murder. Either it's like killing, homicide. You either must not do it or you must do it, right? When it comes to homicide, either you're acting in self-defense, a defense of third party, or you're a murderer, right? So you got one, it's a razor edge. So too with lashon hara. If someone is going to go into business with someone you know to be dishonest, someone is courting a young woman and you know him to be an abuser, you are obliged. You don't have the right to remain silent. You must go speak ill of that person.
Right.
Because we don't want it, because even in the Jewish community, there's always going to be people with money and power and so on. We do not want to have a chilling effect on people's ability to speak the truth about and to whom they want. And because of this, I would apply this also to bad ideas in medicine and so on, that to some extent we have to let people speak, because sometimes minority ideas, like the idea that microbes can cause disease, which everyone laughed at in 1860, turn out to be the truth. So the very fact that halakha does not give penalties for speaking ill of others applies to speech in general. That we need, that though we have a personal obligation, under Jewish law, there's no freedom of speech. You must only speak good or useful things. But nevertheless, we don't create a system of penalty so as not to chill the weak and quiet voice.
Those are very, very good points. I just have 3 brief points in response. Sometimes saying bad things can have a good purpose, even if they're false. Sigmund Freud brilliantly said that the day civilization began was the day the first human being hurled an insult instead of a spear. So if the alternative is lashon hara instead of hurting somebody or killing somebody, it's a preferred aspect. Second, I have a wonderful Hasidic story about the great Rebbe who had a reputation for never saying anything negative about anybody or any concept or anything. And one day his students came in and challenged him and said, all right, we're going to tell you something, and I bet you won't be able to say anything good about the person. And the rabbi said, what is it? He said, atheism, atheists, people who don't believe in God. The rabbi thought for a moment and said, there's something good you can say about that. If you see a person starving on the street and you're the only one who can save him from starving, act as if there is no God. Act as if God will never save that person and only you can save that person. I use that story sometimes in arguing in front of a jury. And then my final point is, with all due respect to John Stuart Mill, I think he was wrong empirically. That is, he took the position, and many others, Jefferson took the same position, that speech will prevail, good speech will prevail in the marketplace of ideas, that if you just let speech on both sides, good ideas will prevail. I think the Holocaust disproved that. I think there have been many other disproofs of it. When you allow complete free speech, you're taking enormous risks. Bad speech can sometimes prevail, maybe not permanently. Maybe Martin Luther King is right. The arc points toward justice in the end, but the arc can take a long time. So free speech is very dangerous. Short term, it would be so much better to have great people like Rabbi Yaffe be the Platonic guardians and decide which speech is good, which speech is not good. The problem is not everybody's like Rabbi Yaffe. There are people who will make those decisions. So I think John Stuart Mill was wrong when he thought it was win-win. It's not win-win. Allowing all speech can be win-lose, lose-win. And it's a risk we have to take for a variety of other reasons. And on balance, I think I would say you have to allow dangerous speech that might even cost some lives. Now, we have limits. You can't incite violence. We love to say you can't shout fire in the theater. That's a bad example because shouting fire is not speech. It's setting off an alarm. It's no difference between shouting fire and banging a bell that sets an alarm. Yelling fire is not intended to communicate an idea. It's not designed to go to the brain. It's designed to go to the feet. Run, get out of there fast. So it's a terrible example. Oliver Wendell Holmes misused that analogy for good purposes, but it was a very bad analogy. But on balance, I think you have to take the risks of free speech, but free speech is not free, and there are great risks involved in allowing it.
Thank you. Professor Dershowitz, one of the questions came through from Scott Snyder, a local attorney here in Portland. And essentially his question is the president able to use wartime powers, or what would it take for a national mask mandate that was done on a federal level?
We have a very strict constitution when it comes to that. Ours is one of the few constitutions in the world that doesn't use the term martial law. Martial law was very common at the time of the framing of the Constitution. Many states declared martial law. The United States Constitution does not have a provision giving the president the power to declare martial law. It gives him one power. He can suspend the writ of habeas corpus only when there is an insurrection or a rebellion. It's been done. Lincoln did it during the Civil War for a brief period of time. He then went too far, and the Supreme Court in Ray Merriman turned him down, rebuked him for it. President Roosevelt did it for 110,000 Americans of Japanese descent, and he will always be remembered in history negatively for having done that, and the Supreme Court will always be remembered negatively for having approved it. So although the Constitution doesn't give the president this authority, some presidents have taken the authority and the courts have validated it. There was talk, could the president, for example, suspend an election because the pandemic wouldn't allow an election to be conducted in a reasonable way? And the answer that I think most constitutional scholars, I certainly join them, would be no, that on January 20th at noon, the end of the term of the president occurs and nothing could stop it. Now, what if there were, God forbid, a nuclear attack and you couldn't vote? I mean, obviously, there are circumstances under which, as Thomas Jefferson said, the Constitution must be put secondary to the preservation of the country as a whole. Fortunately, we've never experienced that, and I hope we never will.
But just going on a very practical level with the masks, how would a law be enacted requiring all Americans to wear masks? Say that were to happen.
Okay, I think Congress would have the power to do that. It would need both the House and the Senate and a non-veto by the president. I think diseases go across state lines, so there would be a Commerce Clause justification for a national law. It would be challenged. It would be challenged by people in Montana saying what's good for New York, which has closed spaces, isn't good for Montana or Wyoming. And there would be questions that rose to the United States Supreme Court, probably be resolved in favor of mandatory mask laws, but nobody can be absolutely sure. After all, who are the justices? They're 9 human beings who have strong opinions on things. So I couldn't tell you with great accuracy what the Supreme Court would hold in a case like that.
So the current model where the governors are making decisions is the most effective model?
Unconstitutional. Governors are acting and mayors are acting unconstitutionally all over the country. Governors do not have the power to make laws. You know, we hear the president is the commander in chief. No, he is not the commander in chief. He is the commander in chief of the armed forces. The president can't tell you to do anything. The president can't make you wear a mask. He can't tell you not to wear a mask. He is an ordinary citizen when it comes to making you do things. He only has control over the armed forces. He does not have military control or commander-in-chief control over ordinary citizens. That's why we need legislation. Now, we live in a period of gridlock. Nothing gets accomplished because the House is in Democratic hands. The Republicans may control the Senate. Whether they'll continue to control the Senate, I don't know, but we'll find that out on January 5th after there are 2 runoff elections in Georgia, one involving a candidate for the United States Senate who has written virulently, who has signed a virulently anti-Israel letter, subject for a different day, but I urge you all to read that letter and be worried. But you need Congress to pass laws. Presidents and governors don't get to pass laws.
So one of the things you said is we live in a time of gridlock, but I just want to push back for a moment because we're also living in a time of emergency. So we had people dying in communities throughout the United States, and somebody had to do something and require this social distancing and this mask wearing. Was that illegal? Was that
No, it wasn't illegal for the governor to tell you to wear a mask. It would be illegal for the governor then to say that if you don't wear a mask, you're going to go to jail or you're going to get a $100 fine. You can't, governors cannot create crimes. Only the legislature can. The governors can use their bully pulpits. And in some states, governors have been given the authority by the legislature in emergency times. Congress has given the president some emergency powers. Some of them we don't even know about, they're secret. But others we do know about, but they require particular criteria to be met. And those criteria probably have not been met under this pandemic.
Rabbi Yaffe, I want to move on to, I think we've been mostly all in alignment, and the gist of our conversation has largely been supporting the control of coronavirus, the understanding that both from a Judaic perspective and from a national security and a national health perspective, what's been done has largely been appropriate. Professor Dershowitz said some things have perhaps mayors and governors have perhaps gone beyond their control, but largely there's been a lot of support for what has been done. My question to you, Rabbi Yaffe, and then we'll go to Professor Dershowitz, is, but what are the concerns of government overreach from a Judaic perspective? I also want to talk maybe on a not just a theoretical level, but on a personal and experiential level. I think that we have been throughout history. We've also been targets of, whether it was during the Black Plague era or whether it was, there were large signs and, recently pictures going around, signs in front of the Jewish ghettos, and saying, there's a disease, do not enter. My grandfather was in Auschwitz and his head was shaved and all his hair was shaved under the guise of preventing the spread of lice. So how are we making sure, and what is, how do we control, what is in control for government overreach or for in the courts of Jewish law, what type to ensure that we're not overreaching this thing?
So I think this is a really important question because I think no single people has suffered more from overreach by authorities than the Jewish people.
Mhm.
And for example, there were in the 1930s, there were numerous attempts to close all the mikvaot, and you know that a mikvah is the central to
Explain for,
Judaism.
not for those who don't know what the mikveh is.
Okay, so the mikveh is a body of rain or spring water that follows very specific ritual guidelines, and it's necessary for women and sometimes men to immerse themselves in it to continue their family lives at certain points, having a baby, monthly periods, and so on. And this is a central tenet of Jewish law and practice. And some of our ancestors, like my wife's great grandmother, went in the dead of winter after the communists shut down all the mikvaot and smashed with a hatchet ice when it was 20 below, and immersed in the mikvah. Mikvah is big, so the Polish government tried to shut down all the mikvaot with specious hygiene claims during the 1930s when it had become quite fascist and quite anti-Semitic. And obviously those specious hygiene claims were of enormous danger to the continuation of one of the most fundamental practices of traditional Jewish life. By the same token, the accusation of the Jews as being the source of the Black Plague, the bubonic plague, and other things cost literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Jewish lives. They crammed the Jews into ghettos, then complained that they were dirty. So, and I'm talking not about the Holocaust. I'm talking about hundreds of years before. Ironically, Jewish law, separate of the ritual aspect, washing hands, mikveh, demands hygiene and demands keeping away waste matter and so on from dwellings. And that may be one of the reasons why Jews did better in this regard. But the key point is that the idea that authority can use claims of, look, that's what they used. That's why that was the claim for segregated drinking fountains. Negroes, that's what they called them then, were disease ridden. Can't let white people drink from them, make them sick, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we saw it in this country. We've seen it with the Jewish people throughout the world, and I think to some extent, without editorializing, that gatherings that are permitted for political and other reasons are not permitted for religious reasons. If it's dangerous, no one should go. If
Absolutely.
It's not dangerous, then if it's a manageable danger, like Massachusetts has a very complex set of laws that our synagogue fills to the T, how many people per square feet, how much air circulation, and
Right.
so on. And we follow those rules. But there's been a lot of arbitrariness, especially in enforcement. Attorney Dershowitz mentioned Professor Dershowitz mentioned speed limits. So we all know that in New England on the main highways, speed limits are honored by their breach, not by them being kept. And you know what? On a good day with no bad weather and no heavy traffic, there isn't a state policeman from Maine to New Jersey who will give you a ticket in a 65 for going 72, even though technically it's against the law. What I mean to say is that there exists enforcement can be petty, subjective, and if you anyone then enforce against a small group like Jews in Borough Park, well, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's a problem of civil liberties. It's a problem of discrimination. It's a problem of racism, etc. So I think that's something to concern ourselves with. That being said, with God's help, the coronavirus isn't going to be here forever. So on one hand, I don't think from taking off my halachic stat, from a Judeo-historical perspective, the experience of the Jewish people, I don't think that there's going to be any long-lasting negative effects. The only problem is that typically speaking, because of the nature of governments and bureaucracy, once they start regulating something, it's very hard to get them to stop regulating things.
So can I throw a question at you in that regard? Because this
Sure.
is a pet peeve of mine, and it's a difficult one. I get called all the time from my old friends in Borough Park about the issue, which is a custom, not a halacha. When a bris is performed within certain elements of the Hasidic community, the blood is drawn by the mohel into his mouth. There's a Hebrew term for it, which I know you know. And there have been attempts by many to try to ban that practice, saying it's only a practice, it's only a custom. There have been documented cases of herpes being transmitted from the mohel to the baby, and efforts have been made to ban it. And lobbying has been successful so far. And for the most part, it hasn't been banned. Where do you stand on that?
So I'll tell you. So first of all, I have to respectfully correct you. Mitzitza is a halacha in the Talmud. It is a halacha. Like all halachot, it is a fundamental law of Mila. However, two things. One is if there's a genuine danger, we would have to suspend that halacha. And secondly, you can use a pipette or something. You can use. There are various methods of creating suction without.
So let me interrupt and ask you a question. How come that of all the tens of thousands of modern Orthodox Jews that I grew up in Borough Park, not a single one of them ever had that used, ever? I never heard of it. Never. My grandparents were extremely Orthodox. Their beards were as long and whiter than yours. And they were, there's nothing, they never did it. It was just not done. If it was a halacha, how come 99% of Jews in the last hundreds of years didn't follow that halacha?
So this could turn into a long conversation. So very briefly, there are many practices that are halachic that did not make it to America or fell off in America. We could talk about mikvah, we could talk about a lot of things. So that's not necessarily a proof. And obviously the Mila is kosher without it. And I think for the reasons of appearances and concerns about hygiene, a lot of people dropped it. And again, if there is a genuine concern about hygiene, it's considered important for the health of the baby to have a suction, but you could use a bulb. There are many different methods of creating a suction. That being said, it might be true for those who insist on the traditional way of doing it, that you might be able to establish that a mohel is a clean bill of health. But irrespective of that, if let me be very clear that if it was clear that there is a danger, there are many other things that could fulfill the halachic obligation without physical contact. Okay, that's
so. Where would you stand on legislation then? Because you make a good point. The slippery slope. If you start to regulate,
so you know what, with legislation,
yeah.
Let me tell you something. For better or for worse, and culturally, it's not always a good thing. But for better or for worse, Jews had terribly unfair laws imposed upon them for thousands of years. Jews, in particular Jews who stem from Central and Eastern Europe, are really, really good at not keeping regulations and no one knowing about it. So it would be like prohibition. It would accomplish nothing. It's better to keep it out in the open, to have the discussion, to work with the communities, to vet mohalim, to get those even a siphon, that uses suction, but there's a lot of ways of fixing the problem. You make legislation, you're just going to get people feel persecuted.
It's a good point.
And they'll just get really good at doing it in the basement.
But Professor Dershowitz, we're coming to the end of our time, and I wanted to ask.
Oh, that's bad. I'm having such a good time. I'm so much enjoying this.
So are we all. So I want to ask you for two kind of questions in closing. One is, you spent your life as a civil liberties attorney looking both within the United States and across the world, making sure that minorities aren't persecuted, making sure that people's rights are protected. And I think that there can be a great deal of concern right now. This is happening simultaneously across the entire world. We have some good governments that are acting at the benefit of their citizens, but we also have some nasty regimes, and they're all experiencing this at the same time. How are we looking out for the minorities across the world that are not going to be specifically targeted by regimes under the guise of coronavirus?
Well, it's a great question. You're absolutely right. To quote Thomas Paine, these are the times that try the souls of men and women. We've always seen crises and emergencies being used to deprive people of civil liberties. I mentioned the Japanese detention. 110,000 Japanese Americans were kicked out of the West Coast. Their property was taken away from them. They had to sell them for a nickel on the dollar or a dime on the dollar, much the way the Jews had to sell their property in the early 1930s in Germany. There was a real emergency, Pearl Harbor, but the emergency was used to achieve racist ends. And I think we have to be very concerned about that. We always have to err on the side of protecting civil liberties, protecting emergencies. And we're seeing the most repressive governments use these emergencies. And the interesting thing about the coronavirus is they haven't been better at it than the democratic countries. But all countries have made mistakes. Sweden moved toward herd immunity. It didn't work. Italy took a different approach. It didn't work. Germany seems to have had a good response, but it's picking up in frequency. So we don't know enough about the illness to know what works and doesn't work. We do know two things we didn't know in the beginning. I wrote an article in March that was much criticized, an article in early March saying, don't believe what the scientists are telling you. They're telling you it's not airborne, and they're telling you don't wear masks. People forget that. That's what we heard in March. Don't wear masks, because only the first responders need masks. And in any event, you only get it by touching the surface. It's not airborne. And I wrote an article that was widely circulated saying, believe science, but be skeptical of scientists. And we turned out to be right to be skeptical. So we need to have these things debated, and we need to have organizations whose focus is on human rights and civil liberties. And hopefully we can work together with doctors, with science, and achieve an appropriate balance between protecting civil liberties, protecting civil rights, protecting minorities, but also protecting us all from a horrible magéfa, a plague that has changed all of our lives.
Thank you. And one last question is, when we're going to look back at this, we're going to get through it. What do you think we're going to think we did wrong?
Politicize it. I think we're going to think that we were wrong to politicize it, to make it into a political tool. And we've seen that in almost every country. I do think that in the end, the coronavirus had a big impact on this election. And I would hope that when you get something like this, you all can join together and it could unite us the way, for example, 9/11 united us, Pearl Harbor united us. But we live in such a divided country, terribly, that even this plague that affects us all, it didn't unite us, it divided us. And that's what I think we'll look back and look at in regret.
Well, thank you. Rabbi Yaffe, and to you, the same question. In terms of the religious leadership, what do you think they'll think about they did right, and what do you think they'll look back as did wrong?
Interestingly enough, I think, again, as information came in, the religious leadership across the board was actually very good about saying that what we understand scientifically should be implemented. What's interesting is that the same problem we have with the internet is fantastic. I can get thousands of books and speak to thousands of people, but there's a lot of garbage that is coming into Jewish homes and heads that didn't used to come in. And what we saw here were large groups of Jews who listened to, again, whether it's left or right is irrelevant, but who listened to ridiculous, fringe, politicized ideas rather than to their rabbis, rather than to what halakha says, which we've outlined somewhat. And I think that the great lesson is that for the leadership of the Jewish community, we have to be a lot better at getting people to not just to know people, study a page of Talmud a day, not just to know, but to understand the underlying concepts of Jewish jurisprudence, the underlying systems of halacha, and the spiritual ideas that underlie those. I think that we've allowed too much of our community to be orthopraxis, to fulfill the laws and customs and so on, but not understand what it's about, and not understand its internal workings, and not understand its internal spiritual workings. So we all have to work much harder for people not just to know how halacha works, but to understand the spirit of halacha and how it's driven and what its priorities are. Because a lot of things that are, how am I not going to have a wedding with 300 people? But you know what? The law of pikuach nefesh outweighs that. And one life is worth more than 1 million weddings. But I would say something else also, that what we did learn in terms of our leadership and the people who took leadership, you know what we did learn? We did learn how much we really take to heart this idea of the love of our fellow. All the charities that sprung up, all the collections that were made for people who suffered from the coronavirus, all the efforts within the Jewish community to help people in the Jewish community and beyond with the economic issues, all the thousands of pieces of medical equipment that people collected in Israel, donated, so as the hospital shouldn't be overwhelmed. Yad Sarah is one of those organizations that they shouldn't be overwhelmed with patients who could be treated at home. And most of all, what we're doing here, that we found ways to use technology not to spread bad ideas and hatred and stupidities, but we've managed to continue to study Torah together and to support each other and to visit each other and to do all the emotional support, even where we physically couldn't come together. I haven't had a Friday night dinner since January, but every month we do challah and soup, and people drive by, and I see them from a distance, and I'll tell you something. If I add up all the Zoom classes, I have more people studying Torah in Springfield than ever before. So there's a lot of this adversity. It says that the Jewish people are like an olive. The more you press it and squeeze it, the better the oil that comes out.
Rabbi Yaffe, and we're just coming
to the challenge as a people, and I think we've been a good example for the nation.
I agree completely. I think my grandmother would be saying, I'm ausgesucht. I knew you that word, but I'm not ausgesucht. I enjoy having events like this, and you're absolutely right. I think it's going to be the future. I think we're going to be doing more of these. I think we're going to be traveling less on airplanes and doing more of these virtual Divrei Torah and seminars. And I just want to congratulate you for bringing us from Massachusetts to Oregon and allowing us to learn from you, and hopefully you to learn from us. It's great.
Thank you both. It's been wonderful. I'm so glad that you teed yourself up for another invitation by saying we're going to do it again. So
of course.
It's been a great honor, Professor Dershowitz, to have you and to spend this time with you, Rabbi Yaffe. Thank you very much. I think true to your word about the obligation to teach people about the process of Jewish learning and Jewish tradition, I think this hour and a half has been made tremendous progress in that manner. And Professor Dershowitz, thank you for everything you do for defending the civil liberties of all the people. And you start off, when we start off, you said you travel the world helping Jews in need, but I know that you don't differentiate. You travel the world helping people in need, Jewish or non-Jewish. And that's something that's very meaningful to us, and that really comes from the Jewish soul. I'd like to thank everybody who was with us, and I saw our attendance remained very steady throughout the time we were together, so everybody must have very much enjoyed it. Feel free to reach out via email at Rabbi Mati at Chabad Oregon. You should all have my email, and if not, you can contact me through the manner that you registered. Thank you all very, very much. Have a wonderful afternoon.
I just like to, before you hang up, I just want to thank Rabbi Wilhelm for putting this together, but also, and I think Professor Dershowitz will agree with me.
I do.
Structure of the questions and the topics. Rabbi Wilhelm put a lot of work into this and is a real scholar, And I'm just very grateful for the opportunity because I understand a lot of things better now. And also because I got to hear, he won't mind if I call him by his first name, Alan. It was really great. So,
Likewise. Thank you.
everyone should be well, and thank you again. And yeah, we should do this more.
Right.
All right.
Stay healthy.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Zai.